I don't have any books to give me any reference dimensions for designing a wing or anything like that. So I'm just kind of, I guess, shooting from the hip on these. But we're not designing this thing to fly. Hopefully you guys aren't. I'm not going to tell you that it will fly or it won't fly. Just understand that I'm kind of making these numbers up as I go along. There's no real rhyme or rhythm to these numbers. There's no equation behind it. So don't put too much stock in the numbers I'm using. I'm just trying to make nice round numbers. I'm trying to give these angle dimensions to vertical or horizontal lines and things like that. Alright, so now we have a complete boundary here. We can do our boundary between these two and select these edges. One other interesting note, I'm gonna clear these edges out. 3D, these let's see where it is. Come on, there we go. These the projected curves we created, you can't use them multiple times, or at least not in all instances. Most instances, when you try to select them again, you get that annoying beep, and selected object is already owned by a feature. There is a way around that. You can let me hide this wing so it's easier to see. I could start a 3D sketch, and I could come in here, I can select that 3D curve that we created, and I could project it into my 3D sketch, and that would allow me to to use that geometry. If I ever went back and I made some sort of edit to that curve 1, the projected geometry would change as well. So all the relations that are added to keep all these things coincident in the corners and pierced like that, those would all follow. So if you ever get stuck in a situation like that, and really the only time you will is if you don't use the entire projected curve. If you have a projected curve for a good portion of the profile of something, like say I made one curve that defined a lot of the surface, but I decided to drag the endpoint of my boundary back to here somewhere, and it would not let me select that projected curve again to drive any more geometry. I could go into that 3D sketch, and I could project an edge, and let's just project a few more things. Let's project that too. So say I had this one curve and I ended up only using it up to this point. I could come in here and I could trim part of this away based on where it hit that line. So keep that in mind too, that even though you aren't able to select those projected curves, it is possible for you to still use them in other operations. But anytime you create a surface and you have an edge that you can use, even if you have to do a split body like we did back here to break that edge up at some sort of predefined location, I highly recommend that you take the edge selection over any sort of sketch selection, even like reusing the sketch here to create relations. You're much better off selecting geometry off your features rather than off those sketches. Alright, so now we've created the wing. If we look at these the fingers on here, essentially we have a much better profile. It's obviously the curvature changes because the dimensions defining this back spline are different, but everything works out how we wanted it to. But one thing you might notice here, our wing is actually below the body here. Now if you look at a picture of one of these things, that does not happen. That's not necessarily a good thing. So what's going to happen is if we leave it like this, we're going to be messing up the surrounding surface geometry. I'm going to go ahead and save this real quick before I start messing with anything. But a couple options. You could redo your bottom surface to go farther down. We could we could look at this thing from the front. Let's turn this on. Actually, since we can see it, let's look at this thing from the back. And we can see, well, our wing is actually above where the wing is on the blueprint. So that means that the guess that I made to define this bottom surface here was actually a little bit off, because the wing is not supposed to go down that far. So, depending on your intentions, I mentioned this before, you really just have to decide what's important to you in these models. I could go back and I could edit this, or I could potentially edit the projected curves that define this wing. So just to see how it all works out, I am going to edit the sketch that defines this, and we're going to see what happens. Now, if you noticed, I didn't roll back the feature tree to do this. That's probably going to bite me in the foot, but that's alright. I'm looking at this thing and I actually can't make any changes because it was defined by the side curve here. So this is the one I'm going to want to edit and look at here. So what we want to do is I'm going to make it 1150. That's probably a bit too much. Let's just make it 1200 and see what we get. And let's see how things change, see how things update. Now you can always watch the rebuild, or you can, mess with the rebuild in there. Now you can see here we got a few errors. Sketch is overdefined, and patch cannot be created. Now a lot of these errors pop up. I mean, it's obviously it's a cascading effect. So I'm going to roll back to the first error. It says sketch 20, and let's see what happens here. Alright, so we got a Pierce relation that appears to be a problem. Now you can see this spline right here, we had equal curvature, and the spline itself is now flipped around the other direction, and that's not something we want. So let's see if we can change some of this. Equal curvature, let's delete that. Tangent, let's delete that. And then let's look at this thing. See if it'll let us actually edit it. Okay. So select that, and select that, and see if it'll let us put it back. Okay. So let's OK that. Alright, that was the surface extrude, that was our helper. So let's come down to this fill surface and see if it fixed itself. Alright, so now that we fixed that helper surface we created, and the rest of it went ahead and fixed itself, and everything still looks about like it did before. So let's start rolling this stuff down. Wing plane. Alright, there's the first part of our wing and the bottom part. Alright, let's take a look at this thing now. Alright, so now the wing blends slightly underneath the body. We were able to, to skirt that issue just a little bit. I'm still not really happy with where it's hitting the body here. I'd kind of like it to be a little bit higher, even if it's not right in the model. And the reason is because we're gonna be blending this stuff into the, this seam still needs to be blended. This, where the wing hits up front and the back have to be blended, and they're gonna, blend into the body. So having this both hit this geometry here and this geometry down here is going to make a more complicated problem for us. I'm going to go ahead and save it, since we went ahead, we made that edit, and we fixed all that stuff. But then what I want to do is I'm going to edit these curves here, and I'm going to do that first. I'm going to roll back that bottom boundary surface, and let's look at these. Now, one interesting thing is if I try to roll back up above this curve here, I'm probably going to get an error because it's part of this operation now. It's consumed by that. So you can see here you have Trision to roll back the curve, and it's absorbed. So keep that in mind, that you're not able to go back and roll past these individual elements, but you really don't need to, because if this fails when you try to rebuild it, you're going to need to address it right away anyways. Alright, I'm going to turn both of these on. So the sketch 25 was our top-down sketch of the wing. Not really going to be a problem. We're not shifting the wing forward or backward. Really all we need to worry about is the sketch 24. And if you remember, we used this twice. We used it